We begin with news today that the federal government and Alberta seem to be moving closer to a deal that could include the possibility of a BC oil pipeline. News of a potential memorandum of understanding between the two was first reported by the Globe and Mail today and later confirmed by CBC News. And the CBC's JP Tasker joins me now with the latest on what we found out here. So JP, the fact that these conversations were happening was not a big secret, but some timeline details and particular details. What have you learned here?
Yeah, we're learning that Prime Minister Mark Carney and Alberta Premier Daniel Smith are moving closer to a deal, a grand bargain, if you will, on the province's energy sector. The deal could be in hand in a matter of days, frankly. Both sides are feeling quite positive about where things are at this point in time. They want to have an MOU specifically on what it means for the oil patch and what it can do, what the feds can do to help maybe expand oil exports. I'm told by a senior government official that, of course, the number one demand of Alberta all along has been a new oil pipeline to northwest British Columbia. I'm told Carney is open to the idea of actually moving forward on this project, and there could be some language in that MOU that actually suggests there's a path forward, that they could maybe lay out how they could get to construction on this pipeline. Although there are a lot of things they're going to have to go through before that actually happens, because the expectation from Ottawa is that Alberta, as the proponent of this pipeline, will be the ones to do the Indigenous consultation that's required constitutionally, of course. They will also be responsible for negotiating with British Columbia, which is dead set against this pipeline. It has been for years. Sorry, my throat is really dry. It's really dry in here. So they'll be responsible for doing the Indigenous consultation, working with British Columbia on the negotiations. And of course, there's another thing that's a huge sticking point for this pipeline, David, and that's the oil tanker ban bill, which has been a major thing that has stymied oil pipeline construction to this point, because you can't have tankers off the coast, the north coast of British Columbia. As a result of this ban, I'm told that the government is considering some exemptions using its powers under C5, which is that nation-building legislation that the Carney government put forward this summer. There may be some exemptions under that legislation they can use to allow tankers that would normally be covered by this ban to actually use some of these ports in British Columbia to get that oil from the pipeline to markets in Asia. That's one of the things that is happening. Of course, this is a negotiation. It's not just a one-sided thing. It's not just what Ottawa can give up to Alberta. I'm also told that there's a lot of emphasis on an industrial carbon tax, right? Because we know Carney has committed to that price. He wants to see that policy continue. He wants to strengthen it if we believe some of the language that was in the most recent federal budget. He wants Daniel Smith to maybe buy into this industrial carbon tax. There's also talk about the Pathways Plus project, which could also be included in this MOU, and that's something that would maybe help with the emissions intensity of some of the oil that's pumped out of the ground in Alberta.
Okay, because we've seen this sort of framework of what we're kind of calling the grand bargain. And I'm going to riff for a bit if you need to get a sip of water there, JP, because it is essentially a willingness to explore the possibility of a pipeline to the BC coast. In return, as spelled out in the budget, by 2030, having a national agreement on an industrial carbon price spread out over multiple decades that would help deal with emissions reduction, allowing you to get rid of the oil and gas emissions cap, which has been a thorn in the side. The Pathways Carbon Capture Project would be part of this as well, that there would need to be an investment there from the oil companies to do carbon capture and sequestration. Their argument against that was been the lack of revenue certainty. An oil pipeline would help deal with some of those things. So that seems to be the structure of it. Not a full lifting of the oil, the tanker ban, but case-by-case exemptions to allow for it to go ahead. The Indigenous consultations in BC, that's a whole other issue that still needs to be dealt with. So that's where the feds and Smith seem to be in the broad outlines. Well, what are we hearing from the Premier of Alberta and the Alberta government on this?
Yeah, I mean, the relationship between Mark Carney and Daniel Smith has really markedly improved, right? I mean, it's a lot different than it was under Justin Trudeau. And I've been told that the overhaul of this relationship is akin to a major facelift, because they really are, it's a whole new landscape and it's a whole new environment, and things are really looking good. She spoke to reporters in Edmonton earlier this week and said that she thinks that Mark Carney understands that there needs to be an unlocking of natural resources from Alberta. It can't be landlocked. And she thinks that he understands that one of the major concerns right now is Alberta separatism, the Western alienation, things that have bubbled up over the last number of years. She thinks he's attentive to those issues and is willing to potentially approve an oil pipeline to try and tamp some of that down. What I think was interesting is that she said one of the major sticking points for this potential memorandum of understanding is the Liberal caucus here in Ottawa. She said it might be difficult for Carney to convince his caucus to go along with what they're discussing here with this MOU, because it would mean a 180 for some of these MPs based on what they had been supporting for a number of years, some of them in some instances for 10 years under former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And so I think that she is suggesting that things are looking good. They are both kind of aligned on where they have to go with energy, in Alberta in particular, but it might be MPs. And we heard from some of those Liberal MPs today, David, who said that they might be willing to support a pipeline project if BC is on side, if there is adequate Indigenous consultation. And we don't know if Alberta is going to be able to achieve that, frankly, at this stage.
Yeah, I mean, the end result of this and the timeline they're working towards is maybe in the days after Mark Carney gets back from the UAE and the G20 and before Danielle Smith has her annual general meeting in the last weekend of November, is that it would remove the federal impediments, right? That, as outlined by the Premier of Alberta. The British Columbia challenges, the Indigenous challenges, those would still remain. And of course, whatever the business community decides to do there. But it takes the blame away from Mark Carney, it would seem. All right, JP, we appreciate it. This is CBC's JP Tasker here with me today. Well, it appears that the federal government and the government of Alberta are nearing some sort of an agreement on a pipeline. First reported by the Globe and Mail, the two sides are close to signing a memorandum of understanding, and it involves a new pipeline running from Alberta to the BC coast, which would mean a limited exemption to the current ban on oil tankers. Now, CBC has confirmed that report with its own sourcing, and reaction amongst Liberals here in Ottawa was a mix of optimism and skepticism.
I won't comment on an article with anonymous sources.
But how comfortable are you? He's already said that he's already in this MOU discussion with Alberta for a new oil pipeline.
Let's see what the MOU will say when it's made public.
This is a national conversation that needs to happen, but most importantly, it needs to happen with the communities who live along that coast, because they're the ones who would be most affected by lifting that ban.
I think what's important is what Minister Hodgson and the Prime Minister said, is that for any projects, particularly anything that's going to be listed on the national project or the major projects list, it's going to have provincial buy-in and Indigenous support.
There has to be Indigenous consent. The province's impact have to be on board, and those are the conditions. And right now, I don't see that. And it's all hypothetical right now.
Canada is one of the very few countries in the world who can develop natural resources in a sustainable and responsible way. I don't want to prejudge what may happen, but I would say that Canada is an energy superpower.
Projects would need the support of the jurisdictions in which they're being built. So I think there's got to be some conversations with the Premier. And in terms of First Nations, I mean, there needs to be significant support. It doesn't necessarily have to be unanimous. It wasn't in the case of Trans Mountain, but there needs to be significant support. And at the present time, I don't think there is.
Okay, we're going to start there with the power panel today. Brad Levine is a former national campaign director for the NDP. And here with me in the studio, Jonathan Kalis was a Quebec advisor to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Tim Powers is a former strategist for Conservative parties. And Sherelle Evelyn is the managing editor of the Hill Times. Good to see you all. Happy Wednesday, if I've got my days right. I've been getting them wrong every day this week. Jono. As a former Quebec advisor to the Liberal Party of Canada, you saw the clips there from caucus. How easy is an MOU that says, okay, let's work on doing a pipeline to the BC coast for the Liberal caucus to swallow?
Well, let's not be too cliche, but the devil will be in the details. What's in this MOU? Is it really like, here's the plan, this is what it looks like, and just go and implement it? Or is it more concepts of a plan? Or is it somewhere in between where it allows them to dig much deeper and much quicker onto some possibilities? So obviously if Danielle Smith seems happy about this or seems positive and optimistic, anything she's going to agree to is not going to totally fit with what certain members of the Liberal caucus will agree to. So I don't know what the middle ground exactly looks like, and that's why we have to see what those details are.
But if you parse together, Jonathan, everything that she has said publicly, what the Prime Minister and Tim Hodgson has said publicly, what is in the budget, it is essentially, we will give limited exemptions to the tanker ban, we'll get rid of the emissions cap, you need to get on board with multi-decade industrial carbon pricing, and the oil sector needs to agree to the Pathways Project and carbon capture and sequestration. It seems to be that, right? That this is the broad framework, the concepts of a plan. Do you think that is acceptable to Liberals? Because you can have low carbon oil at the production end, but once you burn it at the other end, it is just emissions, right?
Listen, all of 2 days ago, Elizabeth May, she may burn it down today, but 2 days ago was finding some comfort in the overall big picture targets that will remain, that Mark Carney did commit to, and she was comfortable enough to vote in favor of the budget, not even abstain. So I know she sort of burnt that down today, depending on what comes of this. But the bottom line is what is the big picture? What is the quid pro quo? What is Alberta giving in return for whatever the federal government will give permission to, or at least allow them to explore, that at the end of the day, there'll be some kind of balance that'll make it worthwhile?
Well, Tim, it would be a GDP needle mover of a project. They would probably stay in Canada and agree to industrial carbon pricing and emissions reductions, right? Like, I mean, this is what it seems to be. I mean, what's your thoughts on
I think we need a little bit of Katy Perry firework, because the Trudeau bus Trudeau's being run over by the Carney bus yet again, and that's not a bad thing in this case. I think
he did buy and build a pipeline.
He did buy and build a pipeline, but he was fully in support of the brought in the tanker ban and was not supportive of this pipeline. Look, I think Mark Carney believes he got elected to shake things up, and this would certainly shake things up. I think he feels that he should push the envelope, to use some more mixed metaphors, as far as he actually can. I think they have, I hate this word, but I'll use it, have some guardrails there in what they're leaking to the press so far. Limited application of, or lifting of the tanker ban on a case-by-case basis. I believe that's what you and others have been reporting. And everybody that I've heard so far has acknowledged the role that Indigenous leadership will play here. For me, David, what is interesting is if this moves forward, what does this do across the rest of the country? Because in our province, as you know, we have long argued as it relates to Churchill Falls, the original deal that, hey, federal government, get in and help. Use an exemption, a constitutional exemption, to allow for the transmission of power without there being a requirement for different arrangements. So this could set a precedent elsewhere. It'll be fascinating to see how the other provinces react to this as well. It isn't just the Liberal caucus. It could be very good, but it's going to be require a hell of a lot of management skills.
Well, as luck would have it, our New Democrat friend Brad is in New Democrat-led British Columbia today. And, you know, speaking of provinces affected by this, I mean, Brad, I haven't seen David Eby react to this latest news, but we've seen him react to the pipeline at every other stage of its conception. I mean, how do you think this is going to go over out there?
Yeah, well, I think first blush is going to be poorly. Premier Eby just spoke to the New Democratic Party in British Columbia on the weekend, where he got 82.3% of support from the delegates there, and in his speech, he was foursquare opposed to lifting the tanker ban. So it'll be interesting to see. When you take a look at what was been reported, first of all, interesting that an MOU between the feds and a province, very business-like. We haven't seen that, to Tim's point. That was the first thing that jumped out at me. Secondly, why are those in the background leaking or advancing this today? Maybe it's because the BC NDP convention is over. Maybe it's because the budget passed its initial hurdles, and therefore the horse trading can stay focused on one set of players as opposed to people in the House of Commons. So very, very fascinating. But if you take a look at the heavy lift, that if what's been reported today is supposed to be the case, you're going to have to get Eby on side, First Nations on side, and the Pacific Liberal caucus on side, and you saw from the hits on the way in to this panel, there are a lot of Liberal MPs who share the same principles as the British Columbia NDP government, that the tanker ban will put at great risk the billions of dollars of an asset that it is to the economy already by keeping it pristine and keeping it, oil spill risk free. Right. So I was always wondering, David, Why is Daniel Smith so quiet when the projects of national interest came out? And why is BC getting 4 in the first 2 rounds? Now I think that some light is being shed on those 2 questions.
No, I mean, that is an interesting point. And the tanker ban also, lifting that, David Eby has made a plain Sherrill that he thinks it would undermine the consensus that allows the LNG projects and other,
Yes.
mineral extraction in that area to go ahead. But legally, the Prime Minister doesn't need David Eby on side. We learned that with John Horgan and TMX. Politically, you might want him on side, and you certainly would want the Indigenous nations in that area on side. But he also is going to need his caucus on side. I mean, just where do you think this is potentially going to go?
Well, but there's so many unknowns, and that's, I think, what's going to be really difficult for anybody to swallow in terms of getting caucus support, because obviously, yes, you'll have the MOU eventually, imminently likely, but when it comes to, but what does that actually mean in practice, that's going to be really difficult. I mean, I think back to, if I use myself as an example, when I was a wee lass and in my, Spice Girls phase and I wanted to pierce my nose, my mom said, "You can do it. Go ahead.
Yeah.
When you're 18, by all means." And I said, "Great, I'm going to do that. I'm going to pierce my nose when I'm 18. 18 rolled around, and you know what happened? I didn't do it.
Didn't do it?
Because why? And at that point, so in the future, if and when a private proponent might show up, whatever the price of oil is, whatever the climate regulation and buy-in in terms of reducing emissions, if that buy-in changes, there are so many things that are unknown, and so for anybody at this point, even as a caucus member, you can lock in on moral, ethical, legal grounds, but to say that, I'm going to be staunchly opposed, I'm going to be staunchly for it, just because this current leader of my party says this is the way that we're going, I think that's going to be a little more difficult.
Tim,
especially when you have to fit.
You want to jump in there after Journo Spice is what I'm going to be calling her from now on.
I didn't say no when I pierced my ears, unfortunately. I still have the hole there. David would say it's right here. But look, Sherrill hits another point that's important, and that is part of this also may just be the action of talking about it. Having talked to a financial advisor this week who studies the markets, having talked to a partner in a major law firm out west this week, I asked them, so how is the country reacting to Carney and him being in office? And they both said, from different perspectives, but with overlap, that the message is going out to the rest of the world that Canada's ready to do business. So is this part of brand Canada as opposed to a specific deal? Because all of these deal makers know not every one of them gets through. So it doesn't hurt him politically as an self-described Albertan to say, you know what, I'm trying here. I'm going against the place that Liberals have never succeeded to the degree that we would like, and we're trying to do a deal here. Failure is not necessarily a terrible thing here if there's legitimate effort.
Well, I wonder about this, because, Jono, Danielle Smith has very clear what she wants here. And I feel if it was a talk and process exercise, I don't think she'd be as happy as she seems to be with the direction of the Carney government. And I know from talking to her, there was a real skepticism that the Prime Minister and Tim Hodgson, who started talking a very different game immediately, could deliver because of Stephen Guilbeault and Karina Gould and people like that in the caucus. I don't know if that's the case. I kind of feel like anyone who was there when they were down by 30 points and going to get wiped out is not going to stop the Prime Minister. And I think that's kind of where the Alberta government is maybe in their thinking as this gets closer to maybe a next week announcement on this.
Look, ultimately, he gives off the sense that he's looking to make deals. Okay, and to Tim's point, he may not succeed all the time, but he's out there trying. He's hustling to make deals, whether it's with investment opportunities in the UAE or domestically with different provinces. He's looking to change the way we perceive Canada and the way we perceive opportunity. So